Welcome to Streets of the U.S. Today, I will be discussing the Southside Slayer. The term Southside Slayer was used by the media for what was believed to be a single serial killer in Los Angeles during the 1980s and the 1990s. But in reality, there were multiple serial killers operating in the area. These serial killers killed hundreds of black females. Louis Crane committed at least 4 confirmed killings in South Los Angeles. These murders were from 1985 to 1987. In May of 1987, he was arrested for killing one of his victims. Her body had been found in an abandoned house. It was close to where his brother lived. The police noticed Crane acting suspicious at the crime scene. He was taken into custody and eventually confessed to her murder. He also confessed to killing 2 other women. All 3 women had been killed the same way. Crane was also charged with killing 2 more women. In May of 1989, he was found guilty of 4 murders. He was acquitted of one of the murders. In June of 1989, he was sentenced to death. He was sent to San Quentin State Prison to serve his sentence. He died on November 3rd, 1989 from AIDS complications. The next serial killer working in the South Los Angeles area was Ivan Hill, who was linked to one of the killings in South Los Angeles. He was eventually linked to a total of 8 unrelated murders from 1979 to 1994. These murders occurred in different suburbs in LA. He was called the 60 Freeway Killer. He would dump the victim's body along the east to west highway. Law enforcement was able to take him down from DNA profiling. Hill's criminal career started in 1979. He was involved in several robberies. At the time, he was 17 years old, and his accomplice, 18-year-old Vincent Meyer. The 2 were robbing a store in Glendora, California. Myers wounded an employee of the store and killed another employee. Because Ivan Hill was a minor at the time, he got a short prison sentence. He also cooperated in that investigation. During the 1980s, he was rearrested for theft. He was in and out of prison during the 1980s and 1990s. In 1994, he was found guilty and sentenced to 10 years in prison. A blood sample was taken from him in 1994. Hill was supposed to be released from prison in February of 2004. In March of 2003, his DNA test matched that of an unidentified serial killer. The DNA evidence was left on 6 different women in the LA suburbs in 1993 to January of 1994. Ivan Hill was then charged for the murders. Ivan Hill was convicted of the murders and got the death penalty in March of 2007. Ivan Hill was later connected to 2 other murders. In May of 2009, he pled guilty to those murders. Hill was then given additional life terms without parole. He currently sits on death row in San Quentin. Michael Hughes was another serial killer operating in South Los Angeles. Michael Hughes was involved in 6 unrelated killings. He was linked to one of the murders in South LA. These murders occurred from 1986 to 1993. Hughes' murders took place in California, Michigan, and Maryland. Hughes got life in prison without parole for the killings of 4 women in California. DNA profiling led to him being convicted of 3 more murders of women. The second trial resulted in him receiving the death penalty in California. Lonnie Franklin, also known as the Grim Sleeper, was an American serial killer responsible for 10 murders and 1 attempted murder in LA. He was called the Grim Sleeper because of the 14-year gap in between the murders. He also committed these murders in between 1988 to 2002. In July of 2010, he was arrested for the murders. It took 6 years before a jury would convict him for his crimes. Franklin had served in the U.S. Army during the 1970s. He was stationed in Stuttgart, West Germany. He was involved in the gang rape of a 17-year-old girl in April of 1974. He and 2 other servicemen stopped the teen to ask for directions and offered to take her home. She got into the vehicle and one of the men put a knife to her throat. She was driven to a field where they raped her repeatedly. After the attacks, she pretended to like and show interest in Franklin. She asked for his phone number, and this is how law enforcement was able to find and arrest him. He was sent to prison and discharged from the Army. LAPD became aware of these killings in the mid-1980s. The killer was targeting black women who were on drugs and worked as sex workers. Between 1983 and 1985, 13 of these women were stabbed and strangled. LAPD failed to alert the community of South Central. Community activist Margaret Prescott would hold weekly protests outside LAPD headquarters for their lack of interest in the murders. The murders in South Central were taking place while the Night Stalker was also operating in the city of Los Angeles. Richard Ramirez was a serial killer who was targeting women in upscale parts of LA and San Francisco. Margaret accused LAPD of showing favoritism in those cases instead of solving the cases in South Central. Margaret created a group called Coalition Fighting Back Serial Murders and caused LAPD to increase the reward money for a suspect from $10,000 to $25,000 in 1986. By September of 2008, LA officials had a $500,000 reward for the killer. In 2003, Lonnie Franklin was convicted of a felony and was serving supervised probation. Voters passed Proposition 69. This proposition will require DNA to be collected from all felons. Franklin was identified by familial DNA analysis. Familial DNA is the practice of finding potential relatives of an alleged perpetrator. That lead is then followed up and investigated until a DNA sample of the suspect is gathered and tested. The police were able to find similar DNA that belonged to Lonnie Franklin's son, Christopher. Christopher was convicted of felony charges in 2008. His DNA profile was similar to DNA left at the scene of the serial killer's earlier murders. Christopher was too young to have committed the murders, so the police focused on his father, Lonnie Franklin. A police officer went undercover as a waiter to get DNA from Franklin. They used a discarded slice of pizza along with saliva found on the victims to determine a DNA match. In July of 2010, Lonnie Franklin was arrested. LAPD released 180 photos of women found in Franklin's home who are unidentified. Police investigators found over 1,000 photos in his home. There was also hundreds of hours of video footage found. Franklin was linked to 6 more murders. June 6, 2016, a Los Angeles jury convicted and sentenced Lonnie Franklin to death. On March 28, 2010, Lonnie Franklin was found dead in his cell. Another serial killer operating around the time in South Los Angeles was Daniel Lee Siebert. Daniel Lee Siebert ended up on death row in Alabama. He had an estimated 10 to 13 victims in the years between 1979 and 1986. He committed murders in Alabama, California, Nevada, and New Jersey. His first known killing took place in Las Vegas, where he was convicted of manslaughter. He killed 2 women in Los Angeles in 1985. He was not caught until 1986 after he killed a female student in Talladega, Alabama. He was then charged with killing 3 more victims in Alabama. Siebert stated that he committed 12 more murders. He died from cancer complications in April of 2008. Chester Turner was a convicted serial killer. He was a documented 5-deuce Hoover gangster crip. He was convicted of killing 11 victims in between the years of 1987 and 1998. The first 9 victims were killed around Figueroa Street between Gage Avenue and 108th Street in LA. Chester Turner was convicted of 4 additional murders on June 16, 2014. He was sentenced to death July 10, 2007. He was given a second death sentence for the additional murders. Turner gave a DNA sample in September of 2003. He was identified as a match for DNA recovered from 2 victims. David Allen Jones had been wrongfully convicted of 3 murders that occurred where Turner had been operating. He had spent 11 years in prison. Blood evidence did not match Jones, so he was released from prison in March of 2004. He filed a lawsuit against the city of Los Angeles and was awarded $700,000. Please subscribe to the channel. Thank you.